Magandang gabi, ako po si Trixie Cruz-Angeles. Mukhang excited lahat ano, magtsikahan tayo tungkol dun sa Senate debate. Bago ang lahat, huwag pong kakalimutan, like and share. Like and share po tayo. Hmm, di ba may sound na? Pakicheck lang, may sound na po tayo. Whatever happens. Okay? Check natin, may sound ba tayo? Meron. Okay, may audio na daw. Yung iba kasi medyo delayed kaya sinasabi nila walang audio. Kanina talaga nakapatay yung mic kasi nag-share pa ako. So, magandang gabi. Mukhang lahat tayo nakapanood ng SMNI debates. May mga topics that I really would like to discuss na ng medyo malaliman ng konti, no? Halimbawa, Juvenile Justice Act. Merong iba kasi na possibly nagugulat kayo dun sa stand ng ibang mga senatorial candidates natin. At may intindihan po natin kapag na-discuss natin kung bakit yun po yung stand nila. The other is, of course, the Mutual Defense Treaty and the Sabah claim. So, magdagdag na lang po kayo, lagay nyo na lang sa comment section kung meron tayong idadagdag na topic para ma-discuss natin lahat. Okay, let's start with the Juvenile Justice Act. Sige, para let's talk about din some of the personalities involved. Yung iba dyan na-interview na natin, of course, Senator Harry Roque, Senator, nasanay na, ano, kiniklaim ko na lang, sige, Senator si Harry Roque. Spokes Harry Roque, uh, Attorney Agnes Bailen was there, Congressman Marcoleta, so I'm assuming that si Sec Gibo will be at the next round. Hindi pa natin nakikita kung sino yung mga dadalo from the second batch. Pero dito ang ang mga standouts, of course, and meron napansin din natin si Attorney Luke Espiritu. Full disclosure, kaibigan po natin siya, but he has always been very honest that he is a communist. He is, however, also a lawyer and a graduate of the Ateneo Law. Right? Um, Otherwise, diba, napansin natin, he has generally very, how do you call this, serious and sensible stand on everything until he went into a discussion about the Marcos years or about Ferdinand Marcos, which case he got very emotional. Para sa akin, because this is his honest stand on that matter. So kung hindi kayo sangayon dun sa kanyang paniniwala, then all free to vote or not to vote for him. However, I would like to point out that otherwise he had sensible and intelligent points on everything else, on most everything else. See, Attorney Bailen, I think she has lots of good ideas, but she still needs to get used to this kind of forum, di ba? Medyo, ano pa siya, a little hesitant, and she still needs to think faster on her feet or on her toes. But she's very nice, and she understands how government works. So that's a plus. Of course, Harry Roque has that plus also. But like I said, si Attorney with Spock's Harry has a distinct advantage over so many of them kasi number one, he is one of the very few Philippine lawyers who are allowed to appear in the international courts in the J, if I'm not mistaken. Ha? So it takes somebody of special expertise in order to do that. Plus the study by itself of international law, medyo it's a little different and possibly not within the kumbaga it requires a very specialized study and he's very very good at it considering that the Senate ratifies our treaties and conventions. It's good to have him there, but in that regard Lauren Legarda is no slouch either. Nakakadagdag din siya dun sa diskusyon, and to be fair that this I know for a fact is that she has a very good research team. They're always on their toes. Okay. Sabi ni Atticus, Matt, yeah, Attorney Bailen is good, kulang lang sa exposure sa live. I agree. So she must be given more opportunities to articulate herself in public, but I'm very sure that she will manage to catch up. I'm happy to say that the lawyers did very well. Even although there are some instances where we disagreed with Attorney Castriciones, may mga prinsipyo or concepts dito sa ating Sabah claim that we disagreed with that he was using as basis. Gayon pa man, we can confirm now, ilang araw nang kinukulit kami tungkol dito supposedly sa arbitral decision on the heirs of the Sultan of Sulu and or on the Sultanate of Sulu, the requirement of the payment of uh, ano ba yan, pajak to the heirs by Malaysia. May developments pa yon, and this was not discussed in depth earlier on. But like I said, natutuwa ako kasi the lawyers were doing rather well. I like exceptional. I like that, that of course, Simon Cowell position in the on the panel, but my goodness, 'di ba, si sina Sir Klink, sina Ma'am Anna, everybody, they did very well and were engaging with the participants, with the senatorial candidates. Kudos all around. Everybody, I think, did rather well. Yun na nga, there are certain standouts there. Of course, Congressman Marcoleta, Attorney Gadon. Ito yung surprise of the day para sa akin. Kaya pala ni Attorney Gadon na magsalita na senatorial. And what I liked about him, he's very human, acknowledges his mistakes. So unlike certain people who are not in his party, he knows when to acknowledge his mistakes, and he always moves on from that. He having learned this lesson, ganon, maganda yung dating niya this time. But like I said, certain standouts as usual. Well, not but Attorney Gadon was a standout also in his own way. So si Carl Balita, I like that he had a calm approach and calm demeanor. He does make sense, but in certain areas, such as in international law, of course, he would not have the same kind of understanding as the lawyers. Now, I'm not saying this because I have a bias for the legal profession. It's just na really, yung ibang mga konsepto doon, kailangan alam na alam yung depth nun. And to be fair, Lauren Legarda is not a lawyer, but she understands the implications and how international law works. So to be fair, inaaral niya talaga yon. Okay. Alright, since we're talking about the Sabah issue, ano yung sinasabi ninyo na sinabi daw ni Kong Marcoleta? I probably didn't catch that. Sabi na blunder yata sa Sabah issue, sabi ni Nestor Atutubo, sabi ni Castillones at Panelo, history at legal aspect dapat magkasama. Okay, wait. Okay, wait. Ganito yon. We have we have evidence, we have a solid claim on Sabah. Not just by historical right, but by occupation, by recognition, and by the fact of by the paying of the pajak. Okay, importante yung pagbabayad ng pajak. The payment of lease is already implied in specific recognition na hindi mo pagmamay-ari yung lupa dahil mayroon kang binabayaran na may-ari ng lupa. Pag nagbayad ka ng renta o lease, pajak, even whether it is a perpetual lease or not a perpetual one, kinikilala mo the moment that you pay what amounts to a rental or lease payment, it is a recognition na hindi ikaw ang may-ari nun, umuupa ka lang at yung pera binabayad mo dun sa kinikilala mong may-ari ng lupa. And therefore, ownership is one of the easiest things that we can actually prove. The question is, papasok na dito yung tinatawag natin na RAN. Yung right to salvation, yan po yung karapatan ng isang grupo ng tao na identifiably share culture or they are a distinct people. So usually yan kasi hiwalay or kaiba yung kultura mo dun sa either sa kapitbahay mo or identifiable kayo as a cultural group, community or whatever. Yung cultural group na yan has the right to determine kung saan sila tutungo, how to govern themselves, determine who are members of the community and so on. If they are occupying a certain identifiable na territory, may karapatan sila bilang bunga ng kanilang right to self-determination na sila ang mamuno dun sa lupa na ino-occupy nila. That's an offshoot. Pero yung karapatan doon ay yung karapatan doon sa self-determination. So, medyo maano yan. These are, again, concepts usually used in international law. So, dahil may karapatan to self-determination, ito ang ginagamit ng ilang mga identifiable cultural groups na humiwalay doon sa dominant cultural group. Halimbawa nito is Timor. Dati, bahagi sila ng Indonesia ba? And later on, dahil sa kanilang karapatan to self-determination, they were able to work out a way para ihiwalay na sila ay panibagong bansa na. Dito sa Pilipinas, yung pag-identify ng autonomous regions ay it rests on that right to self-determination. Okay. So yung comments puro pa rin medyo we're still talking about Attorney Luke. Right? To be fair, Attorney Luke, like I said, is intelligent, he's articulate, and he does make sense. But if you disagree with his politics, then yeah, that's your right also. But in no way should we have to, kumbaga, well, he is a communist. So yung ibang mga views niya, you will have to take it at that. Hindi naman tayo yung katulad ng ibang parlor na mag-i-insist tayo na yung isang tao ay maniwala or mag-adhere dun sa isang klaseng political thought, di ba? Sabi ni Pesto, I think it was about historical right and legal right. No, these are claims, okay? The historical right, the historical right means that by recognition, halimbawa, in the Treaty of Paris, ni-recognize ng Spain, by the treaty itself, by the US, and implicitly, and also by Malaysia or all other countries, bound themselves to that recognition. Nung na-transfer na, diba, by the Treaty of Paris, Spain to the US, and then US later on recognizes our independence kasama yung territory that was identified in the Treaty of Paris. Okay. Now, as to the private and public claim, there is a difference pagka claim natin as sovereign right. Kumbaga, teritoryo to ng Pilipinas. Pero ayon dun sa sa Malaysian side, at ito yung sinasabi ni Pinoy dati kung kaya't nagkakaproblema yung ating claim, ito ay private right, private claim. Ganito yan, no? Maaari halimbawa ang isang foreigner in certain countries, dito sa Pilipinas bawal, a foreigner can own land. So he owns land in a private capacity, but that land is located in a country. So yung country na yun doesn't say that that country still has jurisdiction over that property even if it is privately owned. So ang claim ng Malaysia is that the Sultanate of Sulu owns that portion of Sabah but only in a private capacity, kaya sila nagbabayad ng upa. Hindi nila pagmamayari yon in a sovereign capacity. Pero ang sinasabi ni na Attorney Harry Roque is that the Sultanate of Sulu ceded it to the Philippines, to the Republic a long time ago, which is true. I've seen this claim. So, nung itinurn over ng Sultanate of Sulu to the Republic of the Philippines, does the Philippines now own it in a private capacity or does it own it as a matter of territorial sovereignty? So, yun yung mga the discussion was on which is the better claim. Pero ang tingin ko, lahat naman kinikilala nila kung ano yung tamang kung ano yung mga basis natin for saying na atin ng Sabah. Pero in the end, meron din yung mga yung mga Pilipino na nandoon, sinasabi nga ni Sir Klink, ang mga Pilipino na nandun, they identify more strongly with the Malaysians rather than identifying themselves as people of the Philippines or part of the Filipino as being Filipino. Kinikilala nila to some extent yung kanilang pagkatausog or bahagi ng cultural community dito sa Pilipinas na kung saan ang sultanate ay naroon, no? But that being said, ang sinasabi ng ibang mga lawyers is, although meron tayong claim dun sa territory na yon, may claim ha, hindi pa yan settled, we also have to take into consideration yung mga tao, yung mga Pilipino, yung mga kinikilala nating mga Pilipino na nakitira doon kung saan sila pumapanig dito sa issue na to. Do they want it to be, Malaysia? Do they refute our claim and identify with Malaysia? In which case, that's one of the reasons that we could actually, slowly give up on the claim or, not pursue the claim. Now, hindi po option para sa atin ngayon to drop the claim because nga may karapatan tayo and there's a historic right, there's evidence, there's title and all that. And kinikilala natin to as part of our sovereignty, although in certain issues like in our own Baselines Act, parang na ano tayo, hindi natin na isama yung Sabah in some of our maps. So that's also evidence on the side of Malaysia. Meaning, it's possible na if we want to pursue the claim, we don't pursue it right now kasi meron tayong issues with secessionist movements that could possibly be funded by Malaysia and so on. So other national security problems, stability problems, problems on whether or not we can pursue the claim right now, given the fact that we also have issues in the West, in the South China Sea. All right, let me see the other comments. Correct me if I'm wrong, if hypothetically Malaysia will go to war against the Philippines, kung i-pursue ng Philippine government ang Sabah claim, ano yung recommendations ninyo? Teka, if Malaysia goes to war and commits an act of aggression, automatically sila yung mali. Because an act of aggression is not allowed under international law. That's exactly what is happening supposedly with Russia. While we identify and we can identify the reasons for Russia in conducting this or in pursuing this conflict, the world or the existent laws and doctrines is that the person who initiates an aggressive act, well, that person loses the standing to pursue its territorial claim. Well, not the standing, more like nababawasan yung bigat ng kanilang argumento no matter how valid it is. Sabi ni Efren Trino, kumukuha natin ng Sabah, di naman kayang pamahalaan ng ating gobyerno, dapat talagang pag-isipan muna kung dapat i-pursue ang Sabah claim. Like I said, simple lang po yan. We do not drop our claim. Pwede naman natin i-hold back yung active pursuit ng claim natin until such a time as the conditions are better. Yun nga yung sinasabi natin, even with the South China Sea. We don't talk about dropping the claims. We don't cede anything. We just hold back and calculate but we do not drop it. Okay? Yung mga iba dito nagsasabi, wag na natin ito. No, we do not to say that. Because we will, habang tumatagal, nagsasabi kayo, sige, drop na lang natin yung claim, nawawala din yung bigat ng ating, ng ating claim to that property, to that territory. Sa tingin nyo ba, sabi ni, ano to? Teka nga. Ayan. Tayong lumitaw yung ibang comments. Sa tingin niyo may mali po ba sa sinabi ni Attorney Gadon tungkol sa pamumulitika ng simbahang Katolika kaya na-trigger si Attorney Espiritu? I think that this was a conflict that was waiting to happen. Those are two polar opposites dun sa kanilang political leanings, and therefore it could have been anything that would have precipitated. Hindi naman ko naman din sasabihin na na-trigger si Attorney Luke. He was just being passionate about it. But yeah, like I said, we don't have to agree with his political stand. I'm just giving him a measure of understanding. Sabi ni Daniel Bryan, when Crimea was annexed by Russia, walang problema kasi 95% of Crimean residents are pro-Russia. The same cannot be said in the Philippines reclaiming Sabah peaceful man or through force. But that's because the situation has changed from the time that we originally made the claim. And part of the reason that it has evolved into that situation is dahil nga we went too far backwards in not pursuing the claim. So, uh, sa totoo lang, yung iba na nag-interfere dun sa claim natin dyan, we should, ano eh, they should have been sued. Tinatanong ni John, policing kanino po mapupunta yung award na 12 billion? Medyo you're counting your chickens before they hatch kasi ayaw ng Malaysia kilalanin uh, yung arbitral maybe for compelled to sinasabi nila that hindi right now hindi nila kinikilala. It would go to the heirs. I like the idea not to agree and make a protest to prevent USA not to bring nuclear weapons in our region due to what if it accidentally leaks or spoils will be at risk. Nuclear weapons are banned by our constitution. Are you talking about nuclear power? They're the ones who made that stupid, very fragile thing, so they have to secure their soil para silang mag-suffer if something accidentally happens upon restoring it. I don't understand the question. Ito, sabi ni James, what I think is na trigger si Espiritu noon, nabanggit ni Atty. Gaton ang Marcoses. Yes. I think it was more that. We claimed it, pero di ba po one-sided lang po yung pag-claim kasi wala naman po yung isang side ng tribunal. I still have to check. They're saying is they do not recognize, but it's another thing if they submitted themselves to the jurisdiction of the court. Sabi ni Ma'am Karen, the senatorial polls are arguing whether we will have a nuclear plant to have cheaper energy. Are you in favor or hindi? Sa paglalaan ng pondo sa pagpapatayo ng nuclear plant, no, yung mabusisi pag-aaral nito kung apektado ba o hindi sa fault line map ng bansa geographically. Matagal na pong napatunayan yung fault line na yan. In fact, that was one of the reasons kung bakit na mothball yan, allegedly. You know, that was one of the things that they raised, the Cory government raised, kung bakit minothball na yan ng tuluyan. Although, primarily, it was because they claimed that it was fraught with corruption. Mark Besabe says, kaya wag na boboto ng Dilawan o LP. Malaysia will not give up Sabah since 60% of its income is coming from Sabah according to Albani. If we pursue it, baka magkapera. Walang WSP if we claim the man-made island of China, gera yan. The other things that we have to weigh are the possibility of interference by a foreign government dito sa ating mga secessionist and rebel movements. They might fund that in order to destabilize us and to keep us from making the claim, pursuing the claim, or as parang leverage. If we give up the claim, they'll stop funding all of these things. So that's one theory that's being considered for that. Again, like I said, I'm not in favor of giving up the claim, but we don't have to actively pursue it as of yet. We wait until the conditions are favorable because these conditions can change. Dati naman, yung mga nakatira doon, they identified themselves as Filipino. Pero nung tumagal-tagal, dahil nga, especially nung panahon ni Noynoy, na iniwan niya yung mga tausog na nandun, well, they now identify more closely with Malaysia. Guys, alam ko na yung source ng news. Binasa ko na kanina yung sa Sabah claim. Sabi ni Ma'am Cora, do you think Balita will support the programs and policies of BBM in case the latter becomes president? I haven't heard him long enough eh. Ngayon ko pa lang siya talaga naririnig eh. Are you aware that during the time of President Marcos, They infiltrated Sabah, but Ninoy Aquino disclosed it to the Malaysians and that operation failed. We are aware of the actions of Ninoy Aquino with regard to possible collusion with a foreign government. Unfortunately, that angle has not been pursued by many of our historians. We need that information to be vetted and to be more thoroughly researched. Sabi ni Old School Pinoy, there's nothing wrong in Attorney Gadon. Nobody's saying that. Attorney Espiritu, bigla siyang naglabas ng issue regarding Marcos malayo sa pero ang not involved in that. He was not involved with that one. Kumukuti-kutitap yung ating signal. Revelation si Attorney Roque may sense and seriousness. May utak siya, sabi ni Ma'am Ana Chan. Si Ma'am Ana, hindi nanood ng interview namin. Matagal na naming alam yan. Sabi ni Pesto, can you educate us on the Sabah issue? What's the Senate's role in this? Isn't it the executive branch's call on this issue? Yes, as a matter of fact. But the Senate kasi has to ratify if there are any conventions or treaties that are entered into, possibly collateral to that claim. Sana talagang pursue ang pagkuha ng Sabah kasi nag-work ako doon. Halos every week may illegal Pinoys na laging napapauwi sa Pinas pero after a week nandun na naman sila. Sabi ni Jether Kish, naku, nakaready na talaga si Espiritu sa simula pa lang, naghihintay lang talaga siya ng pagkakataon na ipasok ang hatred niya sa Marcos sa debate. At least walang nagsabing make it more interesting. Totoo naman din po yan. But, he did get his point across. Yun yung point ko eh. If this was theater, then he was able to disrupt it. He was able to present his particular point of view. Like love him or hate him, pinag-uusapan niyo siya ngayon. At pati yung mga sinabi niya, nauulit. So if you really don't like his message, then don't give it additional publicity. But because it was put in a negative way, tandaan niyo yung sinasabi ko about negative blogging, negative publicity, these spikes of emotion, they attract people. And this attraction, they're talked about and so on. And ano yung sinasabi dun sa PR? Good or bad, as long as you spell my name right. Good or bad publicity, as long as you spell my name right. Because it's attention. You need attention first before you get votes. Now, ngayon, pagka long gone out na and it's all negative, then you're not going to get the vote pa rin. Sabi ni Sir Bobby, impressed with panelists' follow-up questions, a very good discussion and interaction with senatoriables. Okay, merong iba, I'm sure, and this is important for me because I've always been discussing this. Kung titignan ninyo yung mga past videos natin, especially dito sa Facebook, I have always been posting about the Juvenile Justice Act. Now, there are some things there. I'm in favor of the Juvenile Justice Act, but it needs to be corrected. At para kung nanood kayo dun sa aming discussion with Congressman Marcoleta nung in-interview namin siya, he invited us to assist him pagka upo siya sa Senado in revising that law so that it is much more responsive. So tama yung sinasabi ni Attorney Bailen. We have to strengthen the barangay's capability to address this issue because this is something that happens in families. Now, what are the roots of criminality in children who are below the age of 15 and below the age of 18? Primarily, it's the home environment. Napapabayaan sila. And napapabayaan sila, they're going to be raised by their friends and by the streets and in the streets. Absentee parents. but we cannot also blame the parents dahil kadalasan ang ito ay resulta ng uh, poverty. Okay? Poverty, the lack of education, the need for parents to make more money means that they're going to be absent from the home. And if there is no parental supervision or no extended family para tulungan sa pag-raise ng mga bata, then they will be raised in accordance with whatever stimulus is out there. So, ano yung mga kailangan dyan? More after-school programs, kids to stay in school, more programs. And that's one of the reasons why meron pa rin tayong mga 4Ps. Yung 4Ps na yon, meron particular na allocation for each child. As long as they go to school, they're going to get this much per month. And this can be used for whatever needs they have. Hindi yan kailangan i-liquidate. Now, bago kayo magsabi na tayo ng katamaran, mag-promote tayo ng katamaran. No, we give this to people who are in the level of absolute poverty. Meaning, wala talagang source of income, spotty at best, mga nagbebenta lang ng sigarilyo dati na hindi na pwede ngayon, yung mga dating dyan sa kalye, so on. Yun lang poverty is the biggest factor. Yan ang magdedetermine kung meron parental supervision or not. So, ang sinasabi ni Attorney Bailen, these households must be identified so that the barangay can be more responsive. Meron tayong barangay daycare centers. So, for very young children, nandyan yung barangay. But, in many cases, the daycare system is a joke. So, kailangan asikasuhin yan. Kailangan may oversight ang Senado dyan. Also, the facilities for juvenile delinquency, kulang na kulang po. Parang, ito yung sinasabi. So, there was a big public, so many people were in favor, and I've always taken a stand against this, in favor of lowering the age of criminality, which I have always been totally against, because you're putting the blame on the child. The child did not choose to be born, did not choose to be raised in this particular way, did not choose to go into a life of crime. We say that because the capability to make a decision, an informed decision, a mature informed decision, is not present in a child who is below 18. Okay? Ang batas nga natin, mababa pa rin kasi 15 years eh. Pwede mo nang sabihin na may discernment, may capability, may intelligence to make that sort of decision to go into a life of crime. And I am worried that so many people think that we should be blaming and punishing the child. Ang nagpabaya dyan will be because in the Juvenile Justice Act, may role ang barangay pero maliit. The parents, the Catholic Church does not encourage. So many of these children were born unwanted, unplanned, and somehow we're going to make it their fault, and we're going to put them in jail for these bad decisions that they have been led into making. Right now, the way that the law sees our children, particularly those of 15 and below, is that they're not capable of making decisions. Pero dahil we don't allow them to work, because bawal child labor, bawal child soldiers, bawal they cannot enter into contracts, pero gagawin natin silang punishable under our laws. Pwede nating ikulong. Hindi pa natin pinapayagan na uminom o magsigarilyo, pero pwede na silang ikulong. That's really a problem. Okay? Yung mga nagtatanong, pwede bang i-repeal yung Juvenile Justice Act? You may not like Senator Pangilinan, I don't, but there's something to be said about that law. That being said, I'm not saying it's perfect. In fact, ang daming mali pa rin dun sa batas. It doesn't provide for sufficient aftercare. It doesn't provide for what the child is going to, the therapy, rehabilitation of the juvenile delinquent. Pinauuwi lang, which is stupid. Because the child gets into conflict with the law means that he's already in danger. Now, that danger could already be in the house. That danger could be in the streets. You're just putting them back. So, kailangan you take them away from dangerous situations. Sabi ni Ma'am Pinay, yan ang gusto kong answer ni Attorney Bailen in accordance with the Mandamus ruling. Hindi lang na-explain na maayos ni Attorney Bailen, pero dapat maayos yung services ng barangay. Under the Juvenile Delinquency Act kasi, the barangay will child is in conflict with the law, pero dahil underage, hindi siya maaaring i-punish. So, pauuwiin yon. Ito yung problema. First, what if pabaya yung parents? Iuuwi mo lang sa magulang. So, ginagawa nila na may supervision or may monitoring dapat ang barangay. Pero walang aftercare. In other words, sino ang titingin doon? DSWD? Gagawa nila ng case record itong batang to. Tapos how often will the DSWD social worker be able to monitor? Hindi trabaho kasi ng social worker, binigay yan sa barangay. So now, social worker work with the barangay or the barangay is on its own. Walang tumitingin doon. And this is the reason why I want to review the Juvenile Justice Act, not to lower the case for criminal liability, the age for criminal liability, but to address the needs of a child who has already been born disadvantaged. Mahirap na, wala na ngang kulang ang supervision, mangmang yung mga tao all around them. There is no stimulus. They're not encouraged to go to school. They are already dead-ended from the moment they are born. Tapos ipapunish natin sila for acts that they commit because they don't know any better. So that's not fair. Yun, sabi ni Jaime Mendoza, itinaas ang antas ng pagpili ng senatorial balls ng SMNI kaya at yung next election, kumandito ato ka na po. Hi! Oy! I'd have a billion pesos. Sabi ni Lowell, totoo po ba yung sinabi ni Attorney Gadon na may mga gustong sumuko na NBA noon pero pinapatay ni Joma? Ahos. Yun ang tinatawag na kampanyang ahos. Tapos yung sinabi niya na dismissed sa RTC at CA yung sa human rights. Yes po, totoo po yan. So, yeah, ano naman yan? Meron namang basis yan, mga sinasabi ni Attorney Gadon. Bakit wala na sa inyong nagka-question dati nung nagla-live ako tungkol dyan sa Juvenile Justice Act several years ago? Inaaway ninyo ako. Ngayon na narinig nyo na sa ibang tao, hindi nyo na gustong pag-usapan. Ano nangyari? Tingnan mo, so Tatiana says, o nga naman, correct yun. Dapat the government should take care of children, not bring them back to where the problem originated. So, this is important for me, ha? Because ito yung these kids, when they grow up, they're going to grow up and still turn to a life of crime. We are not saving them. We're not doing anybody any favors by lowering the age of criminal liability. Nagka-create lang tayo ng isang generation puro kriminal. Because from the moment they're born nga, dihado na sila hanggang sa their teenagers and they're going now to jail. We have relegated them and that is for sure. They're going to be impoverished for life. Kasi sino ang gustong mag-hire ng isang Vic? Forever na yan. Wala nang pag-asang umasenso yung mga yan. But you need to give them a chance because they didn't have that from the time that they were born. In Saudi, it is the parents who are responsible for the crimes committed by their children. Well, dito din naman sa atin, pero only civilly. In other words, pagka may kunwari, may pinatay yung 9-year-old mo or 8-year-old mo, you're going to pay yung civil liability yung nasa parent because hindi naman sila ang nag-commit ng crime and nobody will go to jail, especially kung yung bata walang capability to make that kind of discernment that this killing is wrong. Sabi ni Jeff, we no longer raise a question on juvenile justice age regarding an age because we learned so much from you. Really? So, Mims says, I think kailangan din ng law to require legal age to form a family kasi may mga parents na sobrang bata pa at hindi pa marunong magdisiplina. Ang tawag po doon rape. Kaya nga may age of meron naman po tayong batas. We set the marriage age at 18 with parental consent pa yan, ha? Consent. Hindi yan yung yung advice lang. Hindi. From 18 to 21, kailangan pa rin ng parental consent yan. So, Eh, ang kaso, how can you stop them from having kids? And this is why I blame the church. Sorry, para dun sa mga ultra-religious. But I do. This, they don't encourage the use of birth control. And people being people, kids being kids, it's going to happen. Teenage pregnancies, they happen all the time. And what are you going to say? Abstinence. Don't do this. Really? Pwede niyo bang ikulong yung mga anak niyo they're of marriageable age? That's not, yeah, it's not really the way to go. We know that it fails. And you have an entire generation of kids who were born as a result of these bad decisions. Bad decisions that we expect kids to make. Are you in favor of Attorney Gadon for staying neutral sa stand natin sa Ukraine-Russia conflict kahit apektado ang mundo economically sa pagtaas ng presyo ng langis? What is your stand on MDT? Abolish or ang dami naman, ma'am. Do you agree with Attorney Lauren na nasa executive yan na chief architect ng foreign policy? Okay, isa-isa. On one hand, we agree in in the sanctions. I'm medyo opposite yun eh. I don't know how the chief executive is going to justify that. But I agree with taking a neutral stand on this. Hindi tayo kasali dyan, except for the fact that we have Filipino nationals who are living in those areas. So we want to be able to take them out. Now, another indication of our stand also is that we have clarified and reiterated our stand in favor of granting protection to refugee status, to those who seek refugee status here. As we mentioned earlier on, diniscuss natin yung executive order on non-refoulement. Kahit apektado ang buong mundo, it's not our fault of these indirect repercussions, diba? Or these direct repercussions of war. You can condemn the aggression without necessarily, well, kumbaga, nahihirapan tayo, so we're going to condemn them, ganun ba? We usually condemn them if they violate, if their acts constitute crimes against humanity, or they violate a very basic doctrine. So what I don't understand with some of the questions here is kasi they're opposite ideas. It's like, sige, girahin natin yung ganyan, but at the same supportive of human rights. It's very, very unusual. Ito, ako, I want to make it clear, we don't need to abolish the MDT. Sabi ni Brian D., kung sakali pong na-push ng gobyerno natin pag-abolish sa MDT, maapektuhan po ba relationship natin sa Amerika? Of course. Diba? Of course. Because that's an assertion with the United States that, okay, we don't need this anymore. And, expect that they're going to get miffed, that there's going to be reactions to that. One way or another, they're going to make us pay. So hopefully, we have a more benevolent leadership in the United States, but I'm not holding on to that hope. My point is that for every action, there's an opposite reaction. Kung hindi natin gusto yung MDT, we can just refuse to implement it. And eventually, in fact, what the president has bargained chip, alam naman niya na halos walang value yan. Pero ang sinasabi niya sa US, sige, abrogate na ako. Wala nang VFA. Actually, yung VFA is an offshoot of the MDT. Ginamit niya yung VFA. Oh, he used it as a bargaining chip. Sige, magbayad kayo. Sige, do this. Sige, do that. And the United States, sino ba ang mas invested dyan sa MDT at saka Visiting Forces Agreement? It's more on the US than on us. Wala silang binabayad sa atin for that. So, While I understand na gusto ng ibang mga senatorial candidates na i-abrogate na yung MDT, sa akin, what is the point? We know that we cannot depend on them. They should know that they cannot depend on us either. Pero sinunwarihan na lang tayo so that we don't push them to the wall. We don't push them and get an adverse reaction. Binabalance natin yung mga ganyang actions eh. What is the point in abrogating it if there is no benefit either way? Dapat yung mga actions natin vis-a-vis the United States, we get something out of it. So that's how diplomacy works. That's how international relations work. Why will you just out of the blue say, ayoko na ng MDP? What is the point? Ito sabi ni Fanny, ang daming loopholes ng juvenile delinquency law ni Kiko at dapat lang talagang i-review at i-amend. I'm pro rehab for these juveniles. Masyado maluwag ang batas na yan. That's why malalakas ang loob ng mga bata plus sila pa ang ginagamit ng mga sindikato to commit crimes because the syndicates know. Nakakalusot yung mga batang yan and back in the game ulit with the syndicate. Sana may program din for rehab of these young offenders together with the parents or legal guardian. Okay, hindi lang po ganun. It's not even that simple. Ganito. Why is the focus on the child? Okay, naging focus yan ng discussions before and that's why some people were asking for a lowering of the age of criminal liability kasi ginagamit sila na courier. Now, ang mga pulis, huhulihin nila yung courier, yung bata. Sasabihin nila, underage, di pa uwi. Instead, why did they not use the child as a potential witness to identify the syndicates? Because nobody wants to solve the crime of the drug syndicates. Nobody wanted to. At ang biktima dito, parati yung bata. Victimized na nga from the start when they are born because they're born into poverty. Ginamit ng sindikato, ginagamit din ng mga pulis to justify their failure or their refusal to investigate the drug syndicates. Diba? Sasabihin nila, kasi yung Juvenile Delinquency Act, hindi natin pwede kasuhan yung bata. Bakit? Yung bata ba yung may kasalanan? Yung sindikato yung may kasalanan dyan. Kurir lang yung bata. Hindi mo nga kailangan kasuhan yung kurir. Basta ituro nila kung sino yung mga miyembro ng sindikato. Kung sino yung supplier, kung sino yung nagbigay ng droga na yan. So, that's really the problem with the Juvenile Delinquency Act. Ginagamit siya. So we really have to stop blaming the child. Sabi ni Jercel, dapat ang kaparian ay maglaan ng isang araw na magdaos ng pagsamba para sa kabataan sa bawat barangay kaysa atupagin ng mamulitika. Baka mo. Baka may humihirit, baka daw mamolest siya. God, that's evil. Okay. Based on personal observation, sabi ni Shine, yung mismong adult po kasi ang lacking in manners and wisdom in teaching young ones. Kadalasan vulgar or loud ang manner in which they talk to kids. Kulang na kulang sa good examples ng kabataan ngayon. Add SOCMED and telenovelas pa. Yeah, so what we're saying is, diba, ang bata, garbage in, garbage out. Yan. So tama po kayo pagdating sa ganyan. So, you know, in other countries, when they're new parents, merong parenting classes. So, required in certain instances. So, kung single parenting classes for the single parent, tapos ina-address yung needs nila, sasabihin sa inyo, ito ang mga charities for your support groups. Ito, there are programs such as, sa US, so, sa Minnesota noon, my son was born there. So, there was, of course, the usual, may mga food stamps, but those are for unemployed. Pero, merong tinatawag na woman, infant, child feeding program for kids who are supposed to be born, you know, borderline impoverished and so on, para kahit paano kumpleto yung nutrition. So we have to encourage yung ating mga NGOs na imbis na nag-NGO kayo na parang pronta lang kayo ng NPA, can you go out and do something, actually do something to benefit these kids? Where are your feeding programs? Where you, one of the oldest charities dito sa Pilipinas is Gota de Leche, which is located in Manila. Ganda yung building nila. Gota de Leche means a drop of milk, and it was a feeding program. providing milk to the children of Manila who were born in poverty. So, ngayon hindi na tayo sure if milk is a good idea dahil sa lactose intolerance ng Asians, but there should be at least some kind of program addressing malnutrition in impoverished households, particularly for very young children. Okay. Just this morning, a 3-year-old kid just ruined my basil and parsley seedlings, but we didn't blame the child. We called the attention of the parent instead. I agree. So that's extremely correct of you, ma'am. Because you're right. The child was left unsupervised. They should be supervised by an adult. So kung maabot dun sa ganyan na point na then it's clearly the parent posibleng nalingat, I'm not sure naman kung sinasadya yan, pero minsan nalilingat talaga yung parents, so we really have to call their attention to it. Sabi ni Benj, "Uy, salamat for your super chat." Sabi niya, "Still watching your earlier vlog this afternoon and here may live ka pala. Nice, pang midnights na." Eh kasi ang daming na-raise kanina during the Senate debates. Ito sabi ni Ma'am Karen, pero natawa talaga ako na Attorney Roque kasi sinaguting sinaniban ng kung anong espiritu that there was no respect with what you said. Parang binuhusan ng mainit na tubig at napaso when Roque said something about walang kasalanan ang buhay at walang husgahan. Savage sa school, pinagtatrabahuhan ko. May parent-school coordination to guide their children, not just academically, pero pang kabuuan talagang welfare. Hmm. You're right. Ang pinaka-flaw talaga sa logic against the candidacy of PBM is the visiting of the sins of the father on the son. So that's why ang target siya ngayon, ang bababaw ng mga target sa kanya, like si Niwe, si whatever, itong mga to, mga hindi dumating sa debate. Really? Ganun na naka-earth-shaking yung tingin ninyo sa hindi pagpunta sa debate. Bakit? Si Lenny ba pumunta sa SMNI? Ba't hindi niyo tinatawag na duwag yun? Ito, sabi ni John, SMNI changed our perception of how debates should be done. I agree. Thank you, Kay. Ano din, Kay? Grabe. Kay Ma'am Maria Calara. Okay. Maraming salamat din sa nagpapadala ng stars. Hindi ko kasi nakikita dito sa StreamYard eh. Nakikita ko na lang when I'm back on Facebook. Ito. Dati, ang mga nakakatanda, acceptable yung pagsasabihan na pangangaralan ng mga bata may ginagawang mali kahit hindi nila kadugo. Madalas kasi impractical na hanapin na pa yung magulang para kausapin imbis na i-correct na agad at that moment. Nowadays, adults don't do that anymore for fear of getting sued, child abuse, or at the very least get into an argument with the actual parents. In effect, that behavior is not checked or worse reinforced. Hindi din ako agree sa mentality na ibata kasi yan. Well, like, ganito, no? You have no supervision over the child. You have no obligation to yan. Although, it does take a village. It's always a community. Pero first, you have to recognize that the absolute power, jurisdiction, or supervision is for the parent. So it is not nobody has the right to discipline a child other than the parents. Kung usapin niyo lang, walang issue yan. Pero kung yung pagkakausap nasa level na pinagagalitan ninyo and possibly verbal abuse or meron kayong attempt to physically correct the child, wala po talaga sa lugar yon. Wala namang nagsasabing bata kasi yan because we all agree that there is a need to discipline and provide a child with borders, with limitations. Talagang hinahanap ng tao yan, ng especially of a human being in its formative years. Pero wala tayong karapatan makialam sa anak na may anak. The state will step in kapag yung parent already violates the rights of the child. Dun lang po. And hindi po basta-basta kung sino lang ang maaaring makialam doon. So we need to understand also that we have boundaries. Sana po matanong din kung paano papanagutin ang mga internet providers sa mabagal na internet. Doon sa mga interview namin, kami yung nagtatanong. Sabi ni Leonardo, i-commend si Atty. Karen sa pagkontrol at pag-handle sa mga senatorial candidates, mahusay na host at mga panelists ang hihirap ng tanaw lalo na po kay Professor, hindi po Miriam, Clarita Carlos po. Hindi napigilan si Attorney Gada. I feel for those who um, they didn't see it coming. The Marcos resurgence, well, not resurgence, the rise of Bongbong Marcos. I can't blame those who or are anti-Marcos and have been so consistently over the years. May mga tao na talagang anti-Marcos as a matter of principle. So I think Attorney Luke is one of those. And uh, for him, it's just wrong. The problem is the logic fails because Bongbong Marcos, at the time his father was president, except for that part where he was vice governor of Ilocos, had no control over things like martial law, whatever human rights violations were committed during that time. PBM did not commit those, nor was he involved in it because there are no cases that have there's no evidence and no cases that will support that. So again, visiting the sins of the father on the son. Like I said, pwede nga natin tanggapin na lahat ng sinasabi nilang mali ni Ferdinand Marcos Sr. ay totoo. But they have to, but in order to discredit BBM, he has to be the one who has fault. Siya yung dapat pumatay, siya yung dapat nag-torture, or that he knew it was going on and either approved of it or did nothing. Was he present in any of these instances, like Attorney Larry said, and supported by Spock's Harry? There are no human rights cases against BBM. The best that they can say is that, kasi hindi ma-justify yung galit kung supposedly nagnakaw and all that. Again, sinabi nga ni Spock's Harry, yes, he is administrator of the estate of Ferdinand Marcos Sr. But just because you're the administrator doesn't mean ikaw yung nagnakaw nun. And if you're going to imply a crime, you have to indicate that that person committed a crime. Pero ang sinasabi nila is, administrator ka ng Marcos Wealth and therefore nakinabang ka. Ay nako. Ay nako talaga yan. SMNI did it again, professional, intellectual discussion, di kailangan maging interesting. Ito, di kailangan maging interesting dahil ito ay talagang lively. They can make the difficult questions, the difficult issues or concepts understandable. Okay, halimbawa, rebus sic stantibus. Sabi ni Spock's Harry, yes, we can abrogate the NPT on the principle of rebus sic stantibus. It means that the situation has changed. You cannot compel adherence to a contract that was created under certain conditions when those conditions no longer exist. What he did was provide the legal is correct. Actually, nakakabitin talaga dahil ang daming questions pang dapat itanong. They talked energy pero hindi na itanong paano ibababa ang presyo ng LPG and oil. I agree on that one. There wasn't enough time but we were discussing about renewables. Pero even they also did not acknowledge na itong mga renewables kukonti pa lang, hindi pa natin mai-implement yan in a large scale. We are still fossil fuel based, primarily coal. Plus, hindi pa ganun din ka-efficient. I mean, we have to face it, hindi pa ganun ka-efficient ang renewables. So we talked about nuclear power. Ang sinasabi naman ni Spoksari, okay lang sa nuclear power, wag niyo naman ilagay sa Bataan kasi may fault line dyan. Established na po yan. And I agree with that one. Which is why yung mga nagsasurvive the nuclear power plant, hindi po yan feasible. Also, it no longer exists. Okay? It's a shell. We can have another, a better one, a more modern one, a safer one. Pero yung wag naman natin sabihin revive the Bataan nuclear power plant. Na it not only is it unrealistic, it's going to be really expensive. There are cheaper, better, and safer alternatives out there. Ayun, sabi ni Ian, lumabas po ang galing ni Attorney Bailen. Oh, proud tayo kay ano ah. But may I just um, uh, be totally immature for a few seconds? Kasi for the longest time when we were doing this Luminous tsaka yung mga live natin sa Facebook, one of the things that people have criticized before, that we I've had discussions with before, is yung sweeping generalization about itong mga taga-UP puro komunista. Okay, I'd like to point out, number one, Attorney Luca Espiritu is a communist, but he's a graduate of the Ateneo Law School. Number two, the ones who did very well, Attorney Harry Roque, Attorney Bailan, graduates of the UP College of Law. Intayin nyo pa po si Gibo Chodoro dyan. So, my point here was that we cannot make sweeping generalizations about any school. Any school. Pag sinasabi niyo, hala, breeding ground ang UP ng mga komunista, didn't you just applaud how many of them who graduated from the UP? So, it's not, this isn't about UP. It's about making a logical statement and logical conclusions. Hindi pwedeng yung UP, puro komunista dyan, puro NPA dyan, o breeding ground or recruitment ng mga NPA. First, understand what the situation is. And two, you cannot say that about any school in particular. Diba? So we now have to consider in a totally different light our generalizations that we keep making. Ang maganda pa dito, nabitin po kaming lahat sa talakayan. Di ba? Kaya yung nagsabi na sino naman nanonood sa SMNI, eto na po, ebidensya. Madami kami na sawang-sawa na sa pinanonood ninyo na mainstream media at nandito na tumatangkilik sa totoo patapos ng pagbabalita. Yun. Hindi, gusto ko din yan. At ito yung sinatawag natin na revolusyon. Na tinala din ni Presidente Duterte. Let's give credit where credit is due, di ba? Na there are rising media who are giving us more of what we need and we're finding out we want them. Kasi dati, ang ginagawa ng mga major media companies is hahanapin nila yung gusto ng tao, bibigay nila yon, even if it's not necessarily good for them. Pero puro sampalan, kapitan, and all of that, activity. Walang natututunan. There are no new storytelling techniques, ni walang bagong camera techniques, ni walang magagaling, talagang wala silang napoproduce na yung talagang magagaling na artista. Kasi yung ngayon, ang iniisip ng ibang tao, komot nakasigaw at nakasampal yung tao, ay, ang galing na artista. Ha? Sumigaw lang, artista na yun? May sinampal lang, magaling na yung acting nun. So, maraming magagaling na acting dyan sa Senado, sinasabi ko sa inyo. So, but this is the revolution that's happening, no? Yung mga, ganyan, we now have a real debate with real discussions with issues that are being put forward. And here, long after the debate is over, we are talking about those issues. And we are learning more about those issues. We are now understanding those issues with varying viewpoints. Hindi na tayo stuck dun sa, ay nako, may nakita akong bata na ginasgas ang isang kotse. Kailangan i-lower yung age of criminal liability. Now that you've heard the candidates, and they have pointed out the weaknesses in the Juvenile Justice Act, we still are angry at Kiko, Senator Kiko, for really cobbling together a law that has more good intentions than actual teeth. So, and is proving to be far more dangerous for our kids and for and actually assists criminal in syndicates in using the children. So instead, we're now oriented, more people are oriented that we're here to protect the child, not to blame them. And to put the blame on the people who are corrupting the child, neglecting the child, not feeding the child, and so on. And this is a failure of the entire community, including those of us who think that lowering the age of criminal liability is going to solve this problem. It's not. Oh, MDT. Suddenly, we learn about rebus sextantibus. Suddenly, we're learning about the dimensions of the dynamics between the US and the Philippines. We are now more cognizant of the historical relationship. It wasn't a teacher, a tutor, and a mentor and mentee relationship. It was more like an abusive one. It's like yeah, incest. Yung inaabuso nila somebody that they have adopted and so on. They're actually treating them badly under the guise of being benevolent. So yeah, kudos to SMNI. More questions, please. Totoo po, bitin ng SMNI debates. We wanted to watch more kasi yung mga sagot ng candidates and panelists are so interesting. Ang sarap panood kasi nakakatalino. Eh yun na nga eh. Suddenly, naghahanap na tayo ng nakakatalino. Lumalayo na tayo dun sa mga bardagulan form of debates. And while President Duterte was very, very good at it, he was the one who precipitated this also. Parang dati, puro platitudes. Dadating yung mga kandidato, meron na sila prepared in their heads. Tapos pang beauty contest, pang Miss Universe lang yung mga sagot nila. With President Duterte, then he was unmasking the hypocrisy of some of the candidates, diba? And that's what he did. So it with brutal honesty. Now we have taken that change a step further, nagiging intelligent discussion as entertainment. O, diba? Kesa naman sampalan, baldagulan as entertainment. Okay, last two. Last day, nagsimba kami, walang homily. Binasa lang ng pare ang letter daw from bishops and it's all about martial law. Wala bang magagawa ang government to stop these kinds of doings ng mga paring Pinglawan? We go there to hear the word of God pero pamumulitik ang ginawa nila. Unfortunately, this is covered by the freedom of speech. We cannot ask them not to talk because we also exercise that right. Ang ayaw lang natin kasi nasa simbahan. But we believe they don't violate any laws. They're not violating any laws with regard to that. The separation of church and state is when the Constitution prevents the state from bringing religion in. But they're not preventing the religions from expressing political opinions. It's their right to do that. If you're going to complain, then you'll have to complain to the church itself. Register your objection to the priest. I mean, yeah, you render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. The time for worship on Sundays is supposed to be God's time. Render unto God. So yung mga ganyan, pwede niyo take it up with the church authorities. It's not for government to interfere. Thanks to SAS for pointing out the weakness of MDT by the absence of automaticity. So this puts a dent on Lenden's standard dependence on the US for help. But yes, we also pointed that out weeks ago. Diba, we were complaining with regard to in relation to the CNN debates. Sabi kasi ni Senator Tito Soto, automatic na i-defend tayo ng US. So we posted the MDT itself and pointed out the provisions which are relevant to that discussion. So there is no automaticity nga. Well, we don't even call it that. It's not automatic. So, kumbaga, that has been in discussion for quite some time. Okay, last second. Ito. Mark Besabe says, I agree with Marcoleta on nuclear power. Far-fetched pa yung solar for every household. Ang cost ng solar, 1.5 horsepower aircon, nasa 150K na. Sobrang mahal pa. But kung hindi rin naman natin tatangkilikin, hindi rin magmumura yan. So we have to do both. But I agree na unahin natin yung nuclear energy. Kasi available na po yung technology dyan. Yun nga lang, the power source for that, the uranium, wala tayong ganyan. We have to import that. So understand that it's also foreign dependence. Yun nga lang, we don't have to do that as often as we would do with the fossil fuels, such as but not limited to coal and to to gasoline, gas, oil. Last na talaga. Nauna na si Luminous about MDT issue after CNN chief debate. Ayan, ina nila sa mindset na nakinabang daw ang anak kaya paparusahan. Why can't they judge BBM on his personal decisions, doings, and choices? Di ba dapat ganon? Kaya nga binigay ang free will para kilitisin siya bilang siya, his own identity. Sa bawat nilalang, basic human right yun, di ba? Great job si Attorney Bailen dun sa pag-check ng bawat na o-occupy na titled land area sa pamamahay sa LGU. Agree. Um, uh, you can always point out whenever they use Ferdinand Sr. against Ferdinand Jr., well, like the sins of the father and all that. But this is what we call guilt by association, which we also have to watch that we're not doing it ourselves. So, yung mga people who equate communism with terrorism it's like a form of guilt by association. Just because there are many communists who are actual terrorists doesn't mean that every single communist is going to be a terrorist or is actually one. In this case, just because a Marcos is was supposed to have plundered or did plunder the country and so on, or was the president at the time so many human rights violations were committed, doesn't mean that just because Marcos din yung pangalan ng isang tao, he shares in the blame of that. So like I said, kahit aminin natin lahat ng allegedly ginawa ni Ferdinand Marcos, there's no way that you can make Ferdinand Jr. responsible for that. And on that note, para hindi kayo magsawa, magla-live pa rin po tayo bukas kasi marami pa tayong issues na pwede pang i-discuss tungkol doon. We did, hi Ian, we talked about the right to self-determination earlier in the live. Baka you want to check it out. We'll talk about it again tomorrow. I-recap natin yan. And ito, sabi ni Theodore, Kinochi, boring ng SMNI debates, walang nagtanong about sa pamamahagi ng lugaw. On that note, maraming salamat sa lahat ng sumubaybay sa live nitong, 2 beses tayo nag-live nitong araw na ito. Sa lahat ng nag-live, nag-follow, nag-subscribe, nagpadala sa super chat at nagpadala ng mga stars. Maraming salamat po. May issues ang Facebook ngayon. It's not just po Luminous. Occasionally, hindi din pong i-access. Nadadaan po ito sa kulit. You just have to keep trying to open the Luminous site. Eventually, on your 4th or 5th try, nakakabukas na rin. Or I'm going to post the handle, which is Noctilucus logo file. If you go look for that at Noctilucus logo file, it will take you to Luminous also. It's one of the fastest ways to access the site. If may problema pa rin, nadadaan, like I said, sa kulit. Maraming salamat and I hope everybody has a good rest. Para dun sa mga on the other side of the globe, please have a good day. Thank you. We'll talk to you again tomorrow. Salamat!